from last time, we got to the point where we talked about styling things using IDs and classes. And one thing that I probably should have mentioned last time is that the same thing can also have multiple classes. So classes can kind of stack up on each other. So for right now, I've got this is an ID right here, so you can see the actual definition of it starts with a pound sign, so that tells you that that's an ID. Let's say in our constitution 14.html here, let's say I want all of these guys to be, have a couple of them called out and a couple of them in, maybe a different color or a different border or something like that. So what we can do is create a class, and let's call that class, just for sake of clarity, let's call it a class of red border. And to make it a class, we lead it with a dot. Oh, sorry. So IDs have pound signs, classes have a dot. And then, as with everything else, it has the curly brackets. And so what I'm going to do is give all of these with the class of red border a border of red. Very good. So that is red, green, blue, and 255 is all red, 0 green, and 0 blue. So this should be as bright a red as you can get on a screen here. So let's zoom out. And so we'll take and give a couple of these sections the class of red dash border. And this is something that messed me up when I was first getting really into using CSS in this way. You don't use the dot here. You use the dot in the definition, but for this, where you're telling it what class this section is, you just use the name without the dot. And as far as naming things goes, with your classes and IDs, your best bet is to just have it something that you recognize. Don't call it class 1, class 2, class 3, because at some point you're going to have to go back and figure out which one has the red border on it. So in this case, I've called it red border, but I could call it, border is red or whatever. And as long as there's no spaces in it, no spaces in the name, and as long as it doesn't start with a number or any kind of weird character like a dot or a pound sign, something like that, that would be very confusing, then it can be named whatever you want. You do want to, however, keep track of capitalization. So if you do capitalize it in the definition, then you need to capitalize it wherever you use it as a class or as an ID. So best to just set yourself some rules. Are you separating multiple words with dashes? Are you doing what's called camel case, where the middle of it is a capital B instead of the lowercase b or whatever? So as long as you have your own rules and you keep following them and you're consistent, then you can name it whatever you like. Just keep it something that you can understand later when you come back in 6 months or a year and have to fix something or add something that the client has decided that they wanted to add, or if you want to reuse your code, you know where to go to find that red border. So I'm going to save this and reload it over here, and so this section now has a red border. None of the other styles have changed because they're all still coming from that section style, and then this H1 is getting it from the H1 style. The CSS definition up here for the red border is this. Just all it's doing is adding what's inside this class to what is already in the section style. So what's happening is it's overriding, this border color is overriding this border color from the section definition and adding, basically changing it from the gray to the red. Okay, so every normal section will get this set of styles, the width and padding and margins, and then anything with this class of red border will get a border color of the RGB 25500. So what I can go ahead and do to make it stand out a little bit more is give it a border width that's maybe 8 pixels or something, and make it really wide, and then give it a border style that's different from everything else. And all of these things, because they're in the class that's getting applied, override the default styles for that section, for that element that it's getting applied to. So let's give it a dashed border. And so if I go back to Chrome here and refresh, so now it has all of those styles overriding the default ones. And what else can we do with a class that we couldn't do with an ID is we can apply it to multiple things. So this section can have a class of red border, and I'll say this section as well. So now it doesn't fit in our grid anymore because it's gotten too wide because of the border. So that class can get reused as many times as we want. But it also means that we can add that class to elements that are not a section class or a section item, because this class can be applied, this red border class can be applied to any element. So if I save that, one of our H1s should now have a big red border around it too, if I can find it. So yeah, now that border definition has been added to this H1. So if you have, for instance, a class that just has this, this font in it, so if we wanted to make our class or have different things with different fonts, we could say, okay, I'm going to have a Baskerville class. And so any element that I want Baskerville added to, instead of having to put it into the definition for the H1 and then maybe the definition for the H2 and the H3 and H4, I can just class those H1s with a Baskerville class. Or if I want to call out some paragraph, I can give it a Baskerville class and it'll look different, without having to create a new ID or having to give it an inline style where I have to go in or do the p tag and then add the style element into the p tag. I can just add a class to it and put it in the header, and then there's one place to find it, to change it, or to make additions to it. So maybe this this font or things of that class maybe needs to have a slightly different color or more leading, line height, etc. So that's reusing classes. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So if I go back here and let's take our red borders off of the stuff that we don't want our red borders on. So we don't want section 3. Let's just do section 1 to have a red border. But what we can do is add another class here, and we'll call it Arial font. So what we can do is now anything that gets this class is going to get a font family. Remember what we did with font family? We just added the names of the fonts after it. So it'll be Arial with a backup of Verdana or sans serif, the default sans serif. So if I want to have this section 1 stand out from the others by having Arial as its font, stack them up just with a space in between. So if I take that now and open it in Chrome, section 1 should be in Arial. You'll see it's in Arial instead of the Baskerville. And that also affected the H1 that was inside of it. So I didn't have to tell the H1 to be a font of Arial, but it got it. So how would I override that and make this H1 look like the other H1s? So right now what's happening is this Baskerville font is being applied to the body tag. So this font family here is being applied to everything in the body, but then it's getting overridden in the header. So the header is getting this Kalam Helvetica font family. But everything else has its own, or everything else gets the default font from its parent. So from the body is the ultimate parent of all these tags, except for this Arial font class. That's right. So what I would do is take this H1 and give it a font family of its own, and even though it's the same as the one in the body, it's overriding the body H1 tag, and then it's also going to override this Arial font class because the Arial font class is being applied to the outside of the H1. So let me take a look and I can kind of walk that through in a little bit more detail. So this section has a class of Arial font, and so that section is getting its font family. But the H1 is getting its own over here in the H1 definition, because the H1 actually is not getting the class. The H1 is unclassed, basically. It's the default. So the class for the section would make the section have that Arial font, and then it would get inherited by the H1 if the H1 didn't have something to override it. So there's going to be a lot of those kind of things where the where things get inherited from get tricky, and where things can override one another get tricky. But what I can also do is, if I wanted all the H1s to have the Baskerville font, but then I wanted this H1, I really wanted this H1 to have Arial, I could give it a class of the Arial font class, and then that class would override the default again. More specific definitions override general and default definitions. So does that make sense for how classes are applied to things? Right. So any style definition can come along with a class, and we can class things with multiple classes. So you've got, basically you're stacking things up, and as Steve said before, whichever one comes last in the style sheet essentially overrides things that are earlier in the style sheet. So if I had this Arial font class here, and I wanted this instead to be Baskerville, call it the Baskerville class. So I've got the Arial font class and the Baskerville font class. If I go down to this H1, and if I want for some reason to give it both classes, because Baskerville came in second and Baskerville came in at the end of the definitions, it overrode the Arial class. Let's see. So let's take a vote. Who thinks that this H1 is going to be Arial? And who thinks it's going to be Baskerville? Okay, so Arial, raise hands. Okay, who thinks it's going to be Baskerville? All right. Baskerville wins. Because it doesn't matter where you put the classes on the item itself as much as it matters where they are in the header or in the style sheet. Yeah. So this, if we look at this H1, the actual code for it, it says class of Baskerville font, and then it also says class of Arial font. And so looking at the code, you would think, oh, the Arial, because it came in second, is overriding the Baskerville. But in reality, what's happening is that because the Baskerville definition is after the Arial definition in the style sheet, Baskerville wins. In this case, this Arial font class only has that font definition, but it could also have other things in it. It could be that I want the size of the Baskerville font class, let's see here. So font, and let's just call it 2M so it's ginormous. So in this case, the Baskerville font class doesn't have anything to override the font size, just the font family. So if I look at that in Chrome, it's Baskerville, and if you look in the web inspector, you can see what it's doing is the Baskerville font is overriding the font family of Arial, but the font size is still there. So this is how so again it comes back to that stacking of classes. So I had a border color class, and then I had a font class, and they're both getting applied, but in this case the Baskerville class is overriding the font family but not the font size. The H1 inside a section inside an article is getting this green color, which is overriding the red color of an H1 that's just inside an article, which is probably overriding the body tag, and then all these other things that are getting basically defaulted are getting overridden, so they all have lines through them until we get all the way up to the actual elements inline style, which overrides everything else. So if I went to the H1 itself, it has all these classes, but then I can say, okay, I want the style for this individual H1 to be the color of, let's just make it black so it's comma 0, comma 0. So the style of color is going to override the green and the red. Right. So the ultimate, well, with an asterisk, the ultimate decision is in the inline style for that element. So if I want to override everything that this H1 is inheriting from other places, I can put it in the style definition for that tag inline. If you do your job right and name your classes, name your IDs, and use your style sheet in such a way that it's legible and readable and it's all in one place instead of scattered throughout the document, then you can come in here, and this web inspector in Chrome or in Safari is very helpful, and say, okay, this is the thing that I need to change. This is the thing I need to fix. So I'll inspect it, and I can see, looking in the code itself, it's not getting any classes applied to it, but it is inheriting this H1 font size from the H1 style definition. So if I wanted to change the font size, I could either change it in the element itself or in all of the H1s that are similar to it, or give it a class or apply a class that has what I want. And so that's where naming things, like instead of just style 1, style 2, big text, small text, it is you want things to be legible not just to yourself later on down the road, but if you hand it to me and say, can you fix this for me? Make my job easier. Or the next intern down the line, if you're doing something that somebody else has to edit, do yourself and them a favor and make it so that it's it makes sense if you were reading it. We've got our columns, and they're nicely lined up left to right, but we've got all this extra space here underneath section 1. Yeah, and there's all the sections are different lengths. So what we can do if we wanted, and this probably wouldn't work. I wouldn't recommend this for something like the Constitution where you're going to want to read it in a linear fashion, but this is what we're working with. So if you had something that you wanted to align in a grid as opposed to just in columns, what we can do is take these articles and give them a height. So where are we doing here? Sections. Here we go. So let's give our sections a height of, let's say, 300 pixels. So we'll have our grid basically being a 280 width plus the 10 pixels and then plus the border. So about a 300 pixel wide by 300 pixel tall grid. And if we refresh that, oh look, Article 1 is stopping right there where it's nice, has a nice box of 300 pixels tall, and oh no. Everything's running over top of everybody. But it's starting to look right because the borders are all in the right places. So the borders are respecting that height. And why is the border respecting the height and not these paragraphs? Well, I didn't give the paragraphs a height, you're right. But what I've applied that height to is the container, the section container. And so the container itself is getting the right height. And so the borders are going where the container ends. But the stuff that's inside the container is overflowing the container because the paragraphs are just, they have more stuff than would fit in 300 pixels tall. If you look back at section 1, it has a bunch of padding under it because the paragraph is only 120 or 150 pixels tall, and so the container has all this extra space in it that isn't getting filled up. So what the height is doing is it's forcing the container to that size, but it's not forcing the content to that size. So what's happening is that the content is overflowing the container, and so we can tell the overflowing content what to do. So we can have the overflow, it defaults to, I think it's visible. And so that's where we are now with all the stuff that doesn't fit in the container kind of overflowing outside of the container. We can have the overflow be hidden. So it just gets cut off. And that would work if you maybe didn't ever want to read the stuff that fell below that line. Or for instance, if it was a background image or something like that, where you didn't necessarily need to see all the stuff that was outside of it. You just needed the headline and whatever fits, and then the rest of it is extraneous. The other option is to scroll. So that will give us scroll bars inside of our content area. So that's a couple of things you can do with overflowing content. The other thing you can do in that situation where you have things that you want to at least be 300 pixels tall for your grid, but you want them to be the right height of their content, is give it a min height. So the minimum height is 300 pixels. So if we go back here, so section 1 is now 300 pixels. But all these others that are longer than that get to fill up the space, or get to stretch to fill as far as their content goes. So in this case, just for the to make a nice clean grid, what I'm going to do is give it our strict height, and then tell the overflow to be hidden. Okay, well, the other thing that we can do is say in the horizontal direction of X, so remember an XY grid, so overflow X is hidden, so anything that's outside left and right disappears, and the overflow of Y is scroll. So in that case, we'll get scroll bars up and down, but we don't get the left and right scroll bars that we saw before. So that's just different things that you can do with stuff that overflows outside of the container. This is handy for things that are usually graphical, that aren't necessary to the legibility. Having the overflow be hidden, and then if you want to have, for instance, windows inside of windows, you can have this, the content scroll. It's it's definitely hard for usability's sake to do this, because you've got too many scroll bars that you could accidentally hit, and then there's how much content is underneath these things. So, but anyway, this is for demonstration purposes only. I wouldn't do this with something that had 10 articles or 10 sections to scroll through and read if you were doing it in linear fashion. So now what we've got in this one is Article 1 of the Constitution, but we also know that there are multiple articles in the Constitution, right? So we need to find a way to get from Article 1 to Article 2 and on and on and on. So if I go to my content here and open up article1.html, that should be what we've been working towards so far on the Article 1 of the Constitution. And then I'm going to open up a new tab and open up Article 2. Alright, so Article 2 is getting the same treatment as Article 1. Article 1, there we go. And if we open up the code for it, Article 2 in Text Wrangler. So we have at the top of it the style sheet with the same fonts and whatnot, and then all the styles that we've got in our Article 1 document. So we've got styles in Article 1, styles in Article 2, and so let's change the section headers. So I want this section H1, instead of it being green, let's make it red. Or is it red and green? Let's make it red. So if I look in, oh wait a minute, where's my red headers? There they are. But that didn't get applied to Article 1 because I was only doing the CSS in the Article 2 style sheet. So what have we learned? Now I've got to go back into Article 1, find that same definition. What color did I make it? Where was it? Was it 200, 100, 100? I don't remember. No, that's not right. Okay. So if you can follow the general gist of the whole class last time and in this class so far, what have we been doing with places for me to make mistakes while I'm coding? Have we been increasing them or decreasing them? Okay. Uh, well, ideally, I should be decreasing them. So instead of having every article have a color definition and every place I have an H1 have a font size definition, I've put them all into this style sheet in the head. But now I've got multiple documents, and so now I've got two places that I need to make changes if I want them to have the same style. So what I can do is take that and take all those style definitions, everything inside of the style tag, and cut it out, Command X. So basically I'm taking this style definition, everything between the two style tags, the open close style tags. They should be the same. And what I'm going to do is create a new file that just has that content in it, just has that style definition. So I've taken it out of Article 2. I'm going to go ahead and take it out of Article 1 as well. And so now I've got the styles in this file here, and I'm going to save that as a new file and call it, where's my AIGA folder? I'm going to call it Constitution. We'll just const.css. So to take these styles and put them into this document and this document, what I do is get rid of that little style tag and do another link tag. And if you look at the link tag, it has, well, there's a handy one right here in the Google Fonts one. It has a type of text/CSS, and then it has a rel, which is a relationship, is the style sheet for this page. And then give it the name of, or the location of, your CSS file. And did we talk the last time about href and what it means? Yeah. That's another one of those that's kind of left over from Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web and was really bad with naming things. The href is a hypertext reference, usually to a hypertext file, so an HTML file, but in this case it's a hypertext reference to this document, this .css file. My style sheet wasn't loading as expected. So if I go back here, first, oh, I guess I did need that. I was being flippant and saying I didn't need some of the definitions in the link tag, but I was wrong. Yeah. Yeah, so it does need the rel, and rel is the relationship, or yeah, it's the relation of this link, this this .css file, is related to the current file as a style sheet. So that's why it wasn't working. So we've gone up the chain of command from stuff being attached to a tag to stuff being attached to the document inside its header, and now a whole site can have a single CSS file be the styles for multiple documents. So I'm going to go ahead and close these down and open up the Constitution folder inside that zip folder. So now we have our articles inside of this folder for all 7 articles of the Constitution. So we've got our CSS file. In this case, I named it styles.css. I'm giving it a rel of style sheet and a type of text.css. And inside of the body, I've created a new tag called nav. And nav is one of those nice tags that it's easy to spell. It's a lot easier to spell than navigation, but you have to remember that it's nav instead of navigation. And what do we use the nav tag for? Navigation. And what do you do in navigating a site? You click on things. And what do you click on? You click on links. And in this case, these are links. So this is a link, this is a link, this is a link. And this is our navigation for the Constitution. So how did I do that? Well, each of these links, we just talked about it a moment ago, is actually what's called an anchor. Sorry, I keep grabbing the wrong file here. So if you want to make a link, you give it some content first. So you want to click on the word Article 1 to go to the Article 1 page. And then you surround that with this A tag, A for anchor, because you click on anchors, not links. Again, thank you, Tim. And the href, the hypertext reference, is the name of the file that you want to go to. So again, this comes in handy, or it comes in handy to have named your files something that you can understand. So in this case, Article 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the signatures for the signatures of, or the signers of the Constitution. In this case, it's very easy to find that where this link goes, because they're all in the same folder. So these are all in the same hierarchy level that we're going to link to one another without having to worry about going up and down paths. But if I were to want to link to something that is, so here's my Constitution folder. If I wanted to go and get a link to 1.html, I can't just do this because there's not a 1.html in the same folder with the document that I'm looking at. So how would you go up a level? Yeah. To go to the parent folder. Yep, it's dot dot and then slash. So yeah, so dot dot goes up a level, and then the slash says, now that you're at that level, look for this document. You don't have to put the name of the folder in this case because 1.html is in the parent folder. Yes. So, for instance, if I'm going to there's not another folder in there. But let's say create a new folder and call it declaration. In the case of maybe we were going to the Declaration of Independence. To get to that document, it's up a folder, so the dot dot, and then down a folder to declaration, which is the name of this folder is inside of the parent, and then the HTML file is inside of the declaration folder. So we're going up the tree and then back down the tree, and then getting this 2.html that's inside of the declaration folder that's inside the parent. So to answer your question about going down a folder, so if I'm in this Constitution folder and I want to go into this images folder, instead of going up a level and then down a level, what I do is I just go into the images folder. So I'm at the level with this document, and then there's a folder at that same level called images, and then the slash says go down into images and then get this file. What caught me about your question was if you do just the slash by itself, what that actually does is goes all the way to the root of whatever your site is. So if this was on my hard drive, it would go to the root of my hard drive and look for the 2.html file, which is not what you want. If this was on a website, let's say it's constitution.org, it would go to constitution.org/2.html, which is perfectly valid if that's where that file is. So if you're 9 layers deep in the site and you want to go back to the very root of the site and get something from the top, instead of going ... How many layers am I deep? I don't remember. You can go back to the root of the site with the slash and then the name of the file that you want to reach. Now, if I want to link to another site entirely, so let's say I want to go to constitution.org. First, I have to spell it properly. So if I wanted to go to constitution.org from this link, is that going to work? That's right. Yeah. You need the fancy http:// because that tells it to go out to the web, go out to the internet, and get whatever is at this address. Because if I leave it off, it's looking for a file called constitution.org, and there's obviously not one. So we've got our anchor, its reference, and then the address for that reference, the thing that you click on, the content of the A tag, and then you're closing that A tag. So that's going to be one of the more convoluted things in writing HTML, but it's going to be one of the most common things that you write is a link, because the web is links. It's you click on this and it goes to that page, you click on this and it goes to another site. So you'll probably want to memorize how this href stuff works. So, you know, up and down layers, up and down to the, you have to have the HTTPs and whatnot. So in our navigation for the site, this is, what would you call this? it's a list. And with lists, there are a couple of different kinds of lists. So we have a UL for unordered list. We have an OL for an ordered list. And an ordered list is a list with numbers. So an unordered list basically has the bullets, and then an unordered list, or sorry, an unordered list has bullets. An ordered list has numbers. And there are a zillion different ways to do numbers in an ordered list. So if you want to go into Roman numerals, upper and lowercase Roman numerals, A, B, C, D, you can do it in kanji, you can do it in all the different various languages of different ways of counting. If you want to have a list that has numbers in front of it, you use an OL. If you want to have a list that has no numbers in front of it, you use a UL. And inside of that list, you have list items, so LI. So these are, again, those acronyms that you're going to run into. Some things are shortened, some things are not. But in this case, it's an unordered list, and inside of it are list items. And then inside of that, you have your A tag, or whatever you want to have to the right of that bullet, essentially. So here is our navigation list. So we have an item for each article of the Constitution. And inside of it is the link, and then the name of the article to click on, and then we close those tags. So this is a list item, there will be a bullet here, so on and so on. So if we go back and look at it here, so we have our list items, and that's great. You can click on them, go to Article 4. So this is what a list looks like that's not styled. And so if I wanted to put that into the content with bullets and have it be a typical list, I wouldn't have to apply any styles to it. But for navigation, you want something pretty like tabs. So let's look at the ways that we can style this list to make it come up with a different look, but it's still a list. So if I were looking at it semantically, it's a list of links for our screen readers and whatnot. So here's our list. And then what we'll do is open up our CSS file, which in our Constitution folder is called styles.css. And what we've got here is our A tags. And so we're giving them a color, so making it gray. Anyhow, so now our links have a color to them instead of the default blue link color. And if you see something that is the default blue link color, it means that someone has not done their job, or maybe it actually works with the site, but that default Netscape blue that you click on and it turns purple, that's the default. Nobody has changed it. It's obviously a link, and so maybe that's why they left it blue, but it looks lazy to me. Because there's so many nice ways to make these links look better. So one of them is to give it a color. So in our CSS, we've given it a color. And by default, links have an underline under them. And that makes them look like links. That's great. But if we're going to make this link, this navigation into buttons, we don't necessarily want the underlines there. So that underline is a text decoration. Don't ask me why it's a decoration, but it is. And so our links, we can give it a text decoration of none. We can give it a text decoration of underline. I think we can even do a double line, cross through, a few other things, but in this case we're going to do none. And we shall see what that looks like in Chrome. So they're still links. You still get the little hovering finger, but they don't look like links because they don't have an underline under them. So let's go back here. Let's just do this in Chrome so we can see it working live. So here's our A tag. It has a text decoration of none. And if we take that off, suddenly all the A tags have an underline under them. If we go back to the code, what we can do is that fun thing where if you roll over the link, it gets an underline. And in this case, this is where we come to another one of those fun things in CSS where it's another special character. In this case, it's a colon. So this is a modifier for the A tag called hover. So when your mouse is hovering over a link, we can apply a different style to it. So in this case, when we hover over the links, we want them to have a text decoration of underline. Right? So we'll see how that works. So now we refresh this, and so now they don't look like links. Then you hover over them, and they do look like links. And there's arguments for and against this, sort of discoverable things. You get the little pointy finger, bet you know there's a link. The underline is another visual clue. Really, if you're basing your it looks like a link on the fact that it has an underline, that's fine. It could also be called out as a different font, or it could have a background color, or it could have a color applied to it. And as long as you're consistent and make it obvious that those things are links, then usability-wise, you should be okay. So how was I doing that tab sort of display where the list items, instead of being vertical, were aligned next to each other horizontally? Do you remember how we did that with the columns? What I'm looking at are these list items, and right now they're taking up horizontal space, and so they're block elements. I can display them inline, so I can take this li and do a display of inline, all the li's a display of inline. So now they're working horizontally. That's great. But I want them to be more button-like. So how would I make them more button-like? Okay, so what I can do is give it a background color of, let's say, nice light gray. They don't have any padding right now because they're inline, so there's nothing that's taking up extra space. But maybe I could give them a little padding. And that's nice. And they're getting rolled over if I roll over the text, but not the actual edge of the button. So what's going on there? Where did I put the padding? I put it on the list item. So if I take that off of the list item and put it maybe on the link itself, on the anchor tag. Give it a padding of 10 pixels. So now the links are taking up a little extra space horizontally, but the padding vertically is there, but it's not visible because the background is on the list item and not on the anchor. So we could do a couple things. We could add, so what's happening is the padding here on the anchor tag, the A tag, is pushing out the LI horizontally, but it's not doing it vertically because that LI is display inline. So it's collapsing around the content even though the content has padding. So if we display them as block, that's not what I want. I want them display, yeah, sorry, okay. So if we take the inline off, display them as block, what's the other way we can get them to line up next to each other? Remember? Float. So we can float these list items next to each other, left and right, and it's still not going vertically to where the anchor tag is. And that's because the anchor is still display inline. But what I can do is display them as block, and suddenly they're taking up the full size of their container, including the padding. So now if I roll over the edge where the color is, I get that underline as the hover, because I've made the padding on the A tag and the background on the A tag, or the padding on the A tag and it being block now takes up and forces that container, the LI container, outward to accommodate it. So again, we're dealing with that block versus inline stuff. So if I want to display these, instead of floating them, display them inline. What did I do wrong here? Oh, that's right. Yeah, the A tags are displayed as block, and so they're forcing that container to be basically a block element, even though I'm telling it to be inline. So let's make them float left. And how would we add some spacing in between these elements? Margins. So I'll give it a margin of, let's say, 4 pixels. And so that space in between should actually be 8. So it's a margin of 4 from here and 4 from here. But if I wanted to actually be 4 pixels, what I could do is a margin on just the left side of 4 pixels. And so now I've got a margin to the left of that item, and then a margin to the left of that item. And so they're all just space between them and the thing to the left. So it's looking nice. We've got our buttons looking good. How would I change maybe this light gray into a dark gray when I roll over that link? So I've got the A, and yeah, I can't get the hover in the inspect element, but if I go back over here, let's take that, put that in here, and we'll give it a color that's a little bit darker. Let's say 50, 50, 50. Go back over here and grab our LI style. Do you guys see what I'm doing with the definitions that we did in the inspector? Exactly. I'm experimenting in the inspector so I can see it live, and then once I've got it to something that I like, I take it from here, copy it, paste it into my file, and now that it's saved,
Can you do the same thing with Safari?
Safari works in a similar way. Yeah. It looks a little bit different. The inspector looks a little bit different. So now we've got our A tag and the A hover. Oh, there should be background color. That's what I want. It's the background color of the A to be, let's say, 100. So go back over here and hey, look at that. It's kind of funky. Let's take the padding off. Do that. Yeah. All right. All right. So this is, this is a fun way to experiment with the styles um, that you're working on in your own design. All right. So we have our navigation here. It's going from page to page to page that's not styled. And we've got that in a nav tag. And then we can take that same nav tag and put it in the footer as well, so that we have navigation at the top and at the bottom. And since it's in a nicely packaged up unordered list, we can just basically copy it and paste it down here into the footer with no changes. And because it's styled in the CSS as links and LIs, it will look like this wherever we put it. The problem, of course, becomes when we do another, let's say, unordered list in section 2, for instance. So what's going on here? If I wanted to have a bulleted list, I told it ULs. Right. So my list, wherever I put it, is going to be styled in this way. So let's fix that and make it so that in our style sheet, these styles for a link and list item are only applied to items, list items and links that are in a nav tag. So how do you think I would do that?
Nav in front of the A.
Mm-hmm. And then just a space. Okay, that's right. So nav A and nav LI.
Is that a class? Considered a class?
It's an element. It's a container. And it's a nav container basically. I could also give that UL instead of putting it in a nav tag, I could give it a class. And so anywhere that this, UL something, the UL that has a particular class gets this gets these styles. So does anyone want to venture a guess as to how I would do that? Instead of doing nav.li, I'm doing ul.li, or ul space li. So this is list items that are inside of an unordered list. But let's say I wanted to, instead of putting them in a nav tag, let's give it a class of nav. So it would be ul.nav if I wanted to give it a class of nav. So this is an li that's inside of a ul with the class of nav. Gets this style. But for now, what we're doing is li's that are inside a nav tag and a's that are inside a nav tag get this style. And I go back here and my regular list looks great. There's some things that I like about this though, the whole hovering over a link thing. So if I go back to my article here where my list is, and maybe I want it to have a link in it to, you know, some site about the House of Representatives, for instance. Let's just call it example.org. So now my A tag is this default Netscape Blue, which doesn't match the links that I've got up here. So I need to create another style for A tags that are outside of nav. But, you know, I kind of like this nav style for nav A's. I could either take it off, or, well, maybe I don't like that. Maybe I like this hover thing. So what I can do is I can either take the nav off and it'll apply to all A tags, or what I can do is have it be applied to, let's just do this, copy that and paste it. So A tags that, hovering A tags inside of a nav element get this style, and then let's say A tags that are inside of a P element can also get this style. And if I want them to be the same, I can shortcut that by taking this. So now we have hovering A tags inside of a nav, or hovering A tags inside of a P, and they're separated by a comma. So both of these type of things will have this style applied to them. So again, I'm making it so that I don't have to repeat myself or find multiple places where I have to change the same thing if I want them to be the same. So if I go back here, this link gets the same hovering treatment as these links do, but it doesn't get all the rest of the stuff because it's not inside of a nav. Or it's not, the other stuff is the li that's not getting applied. Does that make sense? Okay. If we've got something interesting that we want to put onto a website that's not just text, it's going to be an image, right? Okay. So the image, in this case, of a kitty, I promised you kittens last time, there's kittens, is, in the case of article 1 down here, in a new section tag. And what have I done here with that section tag? Basically, I've made it 2 columns. And what I'm doing here is taking the style, doing an inline style, and defining its width to be 2 columns wide, essentially. And so inside of that section tag is an image tag, and we'll just rebuild that here. So it's img for image, because again, where do you take shortcuts? Apparently, you drop all the vowels of certain words. Um, and then instead of it being an href like you would for a link, it's the source. So the image source. And then if we look in that folder, we should have a folder called images. And so this is my 800 pixel wide image. This is my 600 by 400 image. So I'll take that, the 600 by 400 GIF or GIF, depending on who you ask. So it's 600 pixels by 400 pixels wide, and it's just this gray. So we were talking about traversing up and down folders. How would I get to that image, since it is in this images folder right next to article 1? Okay, so images for the name of the folder, and then inside the folder is that GIF file. And I'm going to say GIF even if other people correct me, because that's how I learned it. And as someone pointed out recently, you don't need the slash at the end of it, but I still put the slash at the end of it because there is no close tag, there's no content for the image. So there is no such thing as a slash image tag. So it's a self-closing tag with no close at the end of it. So now I have this image tag in my column here, or in my section here, and it's getting padding and whatnot from the container that it's in. And that's all well and good. This image is kind of boring. It's just a placeholder, and I actually got it from a website called placehold.it. And if you go to placehold.it, it'll tell you how to get an image of a particular size as a placeholder. Very handy if you just want to throw something in and see how it's going to fit in your grid. And you can do, text on top of it. You can do custom colors and whatnot. But again, that's kind of boring. So there's also a place called PlaceKitten. And so, for instance, you can get kitties for your website of any size. So if I wanted this to be 250 pixels by 300 pixels, it would load me a different one. If I wanted it to be 600 pixels wide, oh, no, that's not what I wanted. 600 pixels wide, for instance, I could do that, or tall rather. So that's where I got the image of this kitty here. And you'll notice it's 800 by 800 pixels. So if I put that into my HTML, and refresh it, because I've got the overflow on this page set to scroll, the kitty doesn't fit in the box. But what if we want the kitty to fit in the box? We want to see the whole kitty, regardless of how big it is, without going into Photoshop and resizing it. So that's where the image tag gets some additional things. So, for instance, a width and a height. So our section width is 594 pixels. So 594. And in this case, you don't need the px because you're measuring the width of this image in pixels, but also just because things are not always consistent. So width equals 594 pixels. Okay, so what's the math there? 800 by 800, width of 594, height of 594. It's a square, yeah. So if we go back here and refresh that, so it still this doesn't quite work for me, but whatever. Now we can see it. So that's how you do an image as a piece of content, and it's going to be an inline piece of content. So let's take that image and put it, say, here with all the no state shells, and make it small enough that we can actually see it without overflowing our bounds here. So there's our image. It's doing this inline thing where it's only taking up a certain amount of space. And just like any other element, even though it doesn't have any actual content, you can style this image to be a block or an inline, basically being treated as a piece of content just like any other piece of content. In this case, it's floating left. We can give it padding or margins and that sort of thing. So that's how you would style, and that's how you would insert images along with text or as content. The other thing that you can do with images, instead of having it be an image as content, you can have it be image as background. So in this case, we're going to take our section and style it to have a background dash image of images 800 by 800.jpg. But in this case, in the style definition, you also need to define it as it's a URL. Don't ask me why it can't just say that's an image because it's a background image. The only thing you can do is use a URL for an image. But that's how you would get that kitty cat as the background for that section. So if we look at it here in the source again, so background dash image, and then there's the image file, and it's inside of this URL parentheses. I guess in reality you could have things other than JPEGs and whatnot as background image, but if you're doing a background image definition, it needs that URL paren to get it. So that is how we get the Constitution and a kitty. And your exercise for whenever you feel like doing it is the rest of the Constitution.